The year I turned 42, I thought I knew everything about cowardice. I had lived with mine for 12 long years, carried it like a stone in my chest, felt its weight with every breath I took. But that autumn of 1883, when a bloodied Apache woman was thrown into the dust before my ranch, I learned something new. I learned that a man can run from his past for only so long before it comes riding back to collect what he is owed. My name is Jacob Cord, and this is the story of how I stopped running. The dust had barely settled when I heard the horse. I looked up from the fence post I was repairing, my hands still wrapped around the hammer, and saw Silas Brennan yanking a woman from his saddle. She fell hard onto the dry ground, her body hitting the earth with a sound that made my stomach turn. But she did not cry out. She did not beg. Instead, she pushed herself up on one elbow, blood and dirt streaked across her bronze skin, and looked at me with eyes that burned with a fury that refused to break. Silas did not bother with explanations. He was 40 years old, with the kind of face that had seen too much and felt too little. His voice was flat, empty of anything resembling human warmth. "Keep the animal," he said, as if he were talking about a sick mule he had found on the road. "Do not touch her. I will be back in 3 days." Then he turned his horse and rode away without looking back, disappearing into the late afternoon shadows that stretched across the San Pedro Valley like the fingers of some long-dead giant. I stood there, the post hammer heavy in my hand, watching the woman struggle to catch her breath. She was maybe 27 years old, Apache, with long black hair tangled with thorns and dust. Her clothing was torn, her left arm bleeding from a deep gash that ran from elbow to wrist. But it was her eyes that held me. They were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a warrior who had simply run out of road. Behind me I heard the cabin door slam open. Tommy came running out, his 12-year-old legs pumping hard, his face pale with fear. "Uncle Jacob," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Who is that? What does he want?" I did not answer right away. I could not, because the moment I looked at that woman lying in my yard, something inside me cracked open, something I had sealed shut 12 years ago at a place called Fort Apache. The memory came flooding back, sharp and vivid as broken glass. It was 1871. I was 30 years old, young enough to still believe that following orders was the same thing as doing right. I was a soldier then, assigned to escort a wagon train carrying supplies to the Indian agent at Fort Apache. We were traveling through Apache country, and everyone was nervous. The officer in charge, Captain Hargrove, was a man who saw Indians as problems to be solved, not people to be understood. We came upon a village just after dawn. It was small, maybe 20 lodges, tucked into a canyon where a thin stream cut through red rock. The people there were peaceful. I could see that even from a distance. There were old men sitting in the morning sun, women working over cooking fires, children playing with sticks and stones. But Hargrove gave the order anyway. "Secure the area," he said. "These savages have been raiding supply lines." I knew it was not true. I had seen the reports. The raids were coming from a different band, miles to the north. But I said nothing. I was a soldier. Soldiers followed orders. The shooting started before I could even think. The cavalry charged into the village, guns blazing, and suddenly the morning was full of screams and smoke and the smell of blood baking in the desert heat. I stood at the edge of the canyon, my rifle in my hands, watching it happen. And then I saw her. Her name was Mira. I did not know that then. I only learned it later, after everything was over, when I asked one of the survivors who had escaped into the rocks. She was 25 years old, a mother, a daughter, a woman who had never hurt anyone in her life. She was running toward me, her arms outstretched, her mouth forming a single word, "Please." I looked at her. I looked at Captain Hargrove. I looked at my rifle. And I did nothing. 47 seconds. That is how long I stood there, frozen, while the woman named Mira ran toward me, begging for help that I did not give. 47 seconds before a soldier behind me raised his gun and shot her in the back. She fell 10 feet from where I stood. Her blood soaked into the sand, dark and thick, and her eyes stayed open, staring at me with an expression that I have never been able to forget. It was not anger. It was not even fear. It was disappointment. I have carried that look with me every day since. Now, standing in my yard with the hammer in my hand and the Apache woman bleeding at my feet, I felt those 47 seconds come rushing back. I felt the weight of them, the suffocating, crushing weight of knowing that I had chosen silence when courage was required. Tommy grabbed my arm, shaking me. "Uncle Jacob, what do we do?" "That man said not to touch her. He said he is coming back." I looked down at my nephew. Tommy was 12 years old, small for his age, with brown hair that never stayed combed and eyes that were too serious for a boy his age. He had come to live with me 3 years ago after his father, my older brother Daniel, died. Daniel had been a drunk, a man who chose the bottle over everything else, including his son. He fell off his horse one night while riding home from the saloon in town, broke his neck, and left Tommy alone in the world. I had taken the boy in because there was no one else, but I had never been good at showing affection. I did not know how to be a father. I only knew how to work the land, keep my head down, and try not to think too much about the things I had done and the things I had failed to do. Now Tommy was looking at me, waiting for an answer, waiting for me to tell him what kind of man I was going to be. I set the hammer down slowly. Then I walked toward the woman. She tensed as I approached, her good hand moving instinctively toward something hidden in the folds of her torn dress. A knife, probably. I stopped a few steps away, far enough that she would not feel cornered. "You do not belong here," I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for something. Weakness, maybe, or cruelty. Whatever she was looking for, she did not find it, because after a moment, she spoke. "I belong wherever I choose to be," she said. Her voice was rough, her English accented but clear. "You are the one who does not belong. This land was ours before your people came and took it." I nodded slowly. "You are right." She blinked, surprised. That was clearly not the answer she had expected. Tommy moved closer, his fear starting to mix with curiosity. "Uncle Jacob," he whispered, "what if that man comes back and finds her here? What if he gets angry?" I looked at my nephew, then back at the woman. "Then he gets angry," I said simply. The sun was sinking lower now, turning the sky the color of a dying fire. I knew how quickly the desert cooled once the light faded, how unforgiving the night could be to a body already worn thin. I also knew what kind of trouble would come if I helped this woman. Silas Brennan was not a man who made empty threats, and whoever this woman was, whatever she had done, she was dangerous to someone powerful enough to put a price on her head. But I also knew something else. I knew that if I walked away now, if I left her here to bleed and die, I would be standing in that canyon again, watching Mira fall, doing nothing. I took a breath and made my choice. "You can stay," I said, "until you are strong enough to leave." The woman stared at me, disbelief flickering across her face. "Why?" she asked. "Because someone should have helped when it mattered," I said quietly. And no one did. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Tommy spoke up, his voice small and uncertain. "Uncle Jacob, are we in trouble?" I looked down at him, at this boy who had already lost so much, who was looking to me to teach him how to be a man. "Yes," I said honestly, "we probably are. But some trouble is worth having." I turned back to the woman. "Can you walk?" She paused, then nodded once. "I can stand. That would have to be enough." Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and old leather. The place was plain, built for function rather than comfort. One table, one chair, a narrow bed against the wall. Nothing that suggested I expected company. Nothing that suggested I wanted it. I cleared the table with a sweep of my arm, pushing aside the tin plates and the half-empty whiskey bottle I had been nursing the night before. Then I laid out what I had: clean cloth, a small bottle of alcohol, a knife that I had already wiped down. The woman tensed when she saw the blade. "It is for the cloth," I said, and set it down where she could see it. She studied my face, searching for the lie. Whatever she found there made her look away. Tommy hovered near the door, uncertain. I gestured for him to come closer. "Get me the knife," I said. "Wash it with soap first." Tommy hesitated, then obeyed. His hands were shaking as he handed it to me. I turned my attention to the wound on the woman's arm. It was worse than I had first thought. Deep scrapes, heavy bruising, dried blood crusted into the skin. Whoever had dragged her here had not done so gently. I worked carefully, my hands steady despite the hammering of my heart. I cleaned the wound with whiskey, not just alcohol. Whiskey had tannins that helped with infection, something I had learned during the war. The woman flinched but did not make a sound. I wrapped the cloth firm enough to hold, loose enough not to cut off circulation. Tommy watched every move I made, his young mind absorbing the lesson even if he did not yet understand its importance. When I finished, I stepped back, giving the woman space. "You fought hard," I said. Her mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I am still fighting." I nodded. That much was clear. "Sleep if you can," I said. "I will be outside." "You are not afraid I will run?" she asked. "If you could," I said, "you already would have." She did not reply to that. But as I turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice low and controlled. "You are not like him." I paused, my hand on the doorframe. That is a low bar. That is not what I meant. I waited, but she said nothing more. I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me. The night air was cool now, the sky deepening to a rich dark blue scattered with the first hard points of stars. I fed the animals, checked the fence, kept my hands busy while my thoughts circled endlessly back to the cabin and the woman inside it. Tommy came out a few minutes later and sat down beside me on the porch step. "Uncle Jacob," he said quietly, "why did you help her?" I looked out at the darkness stretching beyond the fence, at the land that had been in my family for 2 generations, land that my grandfather had fought for, land that my brother had died failing to protect. Because a long time ago, I said, I stayed quiet when I should not have, and it cost someone their life. Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Who?" he asked. "A woman," I said. "Her name was Mira." "Did you love her?" I thought about that. The truth was complicated, tangled up with guilt and regret and 100 what-ifs that I would never be able to answer. "I do not know," I said finally. "But I should have saved her." And I did not. Tommy leaned against my shoulder, something he had not done in a long time. "Are you trying to save her now?" he asked, meaning the woman inside. "No," I said. "I am trying to save myself." We sat there in silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Closer, the cattle shifted and lowed softly in their sleep. Inside the cabin, I could hear the woman moving. Her breathing was rough at first, then steadier. At one point, she murmured something in her own language, a sound like a warning or a promise. I did not understand the words, but I understood the tone. It was not fear. It was resolve. Tommy eventually went inside to sleep, but I stayed on the porch, hat pulled low, eyes on the dark stretch of land beyond the fence. This was how trouble began, I thought. Not with gunfire or shouting, but with a single choice made quietly, without witnesses. A choice to do the right thing, even when the cost was unknown. I had not chosen this woman. I had not invited this moment. But I had chosen not to walk away. And for a man like me, a man who had spent 12 years running from a single moment of cowardice, that choice meant everything. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and uncaring. Somewhere out there, Silas Brennan was riding toward whatever hell he had promised this woman. Somewhere out there, men were making plans, counting money, sharpening knives. And here I was, a 42-year-old rancher with a guilty conscience and a nephew who needed a better example than I had ever been, sitting on a porch in the middle of nowhere, trying to figure out if one act of courage could ever make up for a lifetime of silence. I did not know the answer. But as the night deepened and the woman's breathing finally steadied into sleep, I realized something that surprised me. I was not afraid. For the first time in 12 years, I was not afraid. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, whatever consequences my choice had earned. But tonight, for just a few hours, I could sit here and know that I had done something right, something that mattered. I had stood up, and that, I thought, was a start. Morning came without ceremony, the way it always did in the San Pedro Valley. The sun rose pale and steady over the eastern hills, lifting the night's cold from the ground inch by inch, turning the world from blue to gray to gold. I was already awake, moving through the routines that had shaped my days for years. Checking the water troughs, counting the cattle, tightening a loose rail where the fence sagged under its own weight. I worked the way I always did, methodical and unhurried, as if time were something to be measured in tasks completed rather than hours passed. But my mind was not on the work. My mind was on the cabin behind me, and the woman sleeping inside it, and the choice I had made in the fading light of yesterday evening. When I glanced toward the cabin, half expecting her to be gone, I saw her standing in the doorway instead. She was leaning lightly against the frame, her injured arm bound and held close to her side. Her face was drawn with pain, but her posture was upright, defiant. She watched me without speaking, her gaze steady and unblinking, measuring me the way a hawk measures the distance to its prey. "You should sit," I said, not looking at her directly. "Morning comes hard after a night like that." "I have had harder," she replied. Her voice was low and controlled, carrying no request for sympathy, no invitation for pity. It was a statement of fact, nothing more. I nodded once and returned to my work. I did not argue. I had learned long ago that advice, when given to people who did not ask for it, often sounded like judgment. We settled into an uneasy rhythm over the next few hours. I left food where she could reach it. Cornbread from yesterday, dried meat, water drawn fresh from the well. I did not hover. I did not ask questions. When I spoke, it was only to explain what needed explaining, which gate stuck, where the shade held longest in the afternoon, how far it was to the road that led back toward town. She listened. Sometimes she answered. More often, she did not. Tommy emerged from the cabin around mid-morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair sticking up in all directions. He stopped short when he saw the woman sitting on the porch step, and for a moment I saw the fear flicker across his face again. But then he squared his shoulders, the way I had taught him, and walked past her to where I was working. "Is she staying?" he asked quietly. "For now," I said. "And when that man comes back, we will deal with it then." Tommy looked at me, his young face serious beyond his years. "Uncle Jacob," he said, "I am scared." "I know," I said. "So am I." The honesty seemed to steady him. He nodded once, then picked up a hammer and started helping me with the fence without another word. That was something I liked about Tommy. He did not run from hard things. He faced them, even when his hands shook. By mid-afternoon, the woman had moved from the porch to the yard, walking slowly, testing her strength. She did not ask permission. She simply began mending a tear in a feed sack, her good hand working the needle with practiced precision. Then she swept the cabin floor, carrying water in smaller buckets, making herself useful in small, quiet ways. I watched from a distance, uneasy. Help, when it came uninvited, had a way of binding people together. I was not sure I wanted that kind of bond. "You do not have to," I said once when she was folding cloth she had washed earlier. "I know," she replied. "That is why I do." The answer stayed with me long after she walked away. That afternoon, as we sat in the shade, she spoke again. Her tone was different this time, less guarded, more measured. "You do not look at me the way others do." I frowned slightly, not sure what she meant. "How is that?" I asked. "As if I owe you something." The truth of it surprised me. I looked down at my hands, rough and scarred from years of work, resting uselessly in my lap. I do not want anything from you, I said. She studied my face, searching for the lie. Whatever she found there made her nod slowly. Then you are rarer than you think, she said. We sat in silence for a while after that, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. Finally, she spoke again. My name is Naya, she said. It means hope that renews. I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was 27 years old, Apache, a survivor of things I could only imagine. And she was trusting me with her name, which in her world, I suspected, was no small thing. Jacob Cord, I said. She nodded, as if she had already known. That night, as Tommy slept and the fire burned low, Naya told me her story. Not all of it. Just enough. 3 months ago, she said, her voice quiet in the darkness, I was traveling with 2 other women from my village. We were going to meet with traders to exchange furs for supplies we needed. Flour, salt, ammunition. She paused, her eyes fixed on the flames. 3 men attacked us on the road, she continued. White men. They had done this before. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they talked. They were hunters, but they were not hunting animals. I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing. I just listened. I killed one of them, Naya said simply, with my knife. The other 2 women ran. I told them to run, and they did. But the man I killed, he had a brother. His name was Coleman, Ezekiel Coleman. The name meant nothing to me then, but the way she said it, with a mixture of hatred and fear, told me everything I needed to know. Coleman wants me dead, she said. Not because I killed his brother, but because I cost him money. The girl I saved, the one who ran, she was 14 years old. Coleman had already paid for her. $500. I stole his property. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and true. That is why Silas brought you here, I said. He is working for Coleman. Naya nodded. Silas Brennan owes Coleman $800, gambling debts. Coleman said he would forgive the debt if Silas brought me in, but Silas is afraid. He knows if he brings me to Coleman, Coleman will kill him anyway. So he is stalling, trying to figure out what to do. And he left you with me. Yes. Why? She looked at me, her dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. Because he thinks you are weak, she said. He thinks you will keep me here, quiet and scared until he comes back. He thinks you will not fight. I considered that. It was probably true. I had lived quietly for 12 years, keeping my head down, avoiding trouble. I had built a reputation as a man who paid his debts on time and argued with no one. A man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. But Silas Brennan had made a mistake. He had brought the past to my door, and the past, I was learning, could not be ignored forever. The second day passed much like the first. Work, silence, the slow building of something I could not yet name. But on the third day, everything changed. Coleman came. I saw him first from the far end of the pasture, a dark shape cutting across the pale land, riding without hurry. He was not alone. 4 men rode with him, and even from a distance I could see that they were armed. One of them was Marshal Henry Dawson, an old friend from my days in the war. That worried me more than anything else. If Dawson was here, it meant Coleman had the law on his side, at least on paper. Naya saw them too. She was near the cabin, and when she noticed the riders, her body stiffened instantly. Her hand moved toward the knife she now carried openly at her belt. "He is back," she said quietly. "I know." Tommy came running from the barn, his face pale. "Uncle Jacob, who is that?" "Trouble," I said. I set down the tool I was holding and walked toward the house, keeping my steps slow and steady. I did not want to appear afraid, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. Coleman dismounted a few yards from the porch. He was 48 years old, broad across the middle, with thinning gray hair and a face that had turned red from years of whiskey and rage. He looked from me to Naya and back again, a cold smile spreading across his lips. "Well," he said, brushing dust from his sleeve, "she is still breathing. I will give you that cord." I did not answer. Marshal Dawson dismounted as well, his face troubled. He was 44, lean and weathered, with gray eyes that had seen too much. We had served together at Antietam, and he had saved my life once when a Confederate bayonet came within inches of my gut. I owed him. But I also knew that Dawson was a man who followed the law, even when the law was wrong. "Jacob," Dawson said quietly, "we need to talk." Before I could answer, Coleman pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I have a court summons here, Cord," he said. "You owe me $600, money you borrowed in 1879 to buy cattle. You never paid it back. I am here to collect." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "I paid that debt in 1880, I said, keeping my voice level. "You signed a receipt." Coleman smiled wider. "Receipt?" he said. "I do not recall any receipt. Do you have proof?" I did not. I had burned all my old receipts when I moved them to a new lockbox in 1881, thinking I was being organized, thinking I was cleaning up loose ends. It had never occurred to me that someone would come back years later with a false claim. "This is a lie," I said. Coleman shrugged. "Prove it," he said, "in court. Until then, I have 3 witnesses who will testify that you never paid, and when the judge rules in my favor, this land becomes mine." He gestured around the ranch, his eyes greedy and cold. 320 acres, he said. "Not a bad price for $600, would you say?" Dawson stepped forward, his hand raised. "Coleman, this is not the time." But Coleman ignored him. His gaze shifted to Naya, who stood on the porch, her chin raised, her eyes burning with defiance. "And as a bonus," Coleman continued, "I get what is mine, the Apache who killed my brother." "She is under my protection," I said. Coleman laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Your protection?" he said. "Cord, you are not built for this kind of fight. You are a rancher, a quiet man. You pay your bills and keep your head down. That is who you are." He stepped closer, his smile fading. "You do not want this trouble," he said. "Give me the woman. Walk away. I will forget about the debt. You keep your land. Everyone goes home happy." For a moment I felt the old instinct rising in me, the instinct to stay quiet, to step aside, to let someone else pay the price for my safety. But then I looked at Naya. I looked at Tommy, standing beside me, his fists clenched, his young face full of fear and confusion. And I thought about Mira, lying dead in the sand, her blood soaking into the earth because I had been too afraid to act. "No," I said. Coleman blinked, surprised. "What?" "She stays," I said, "and this land is mine. If you want either one, you will have to take them." For a long moment Coleman just stared at me. Then his face darkened and his hand dropped to the gun at his hip. "That can be arranged," he said. But before he could draw, I stepped forward, placing myself squarely between him and Naya. It was not a fast movement. It was not dramatic. It was simply a man taking a stand, deciding that this was the line he would not cross. Dawson moved quickly, stepping between us. "Enough," he said sharply. "Coleman, put your hand away. Cord, step back." Neither of us moved. Dawson looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Jacob," he said quietly, "do not do this. You cannot win." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can lose the right way." Coleman spat into the dirt, his face twisted with rage. "You have 7 days," he said. 7 days before the court hearing, and if you do not show up with that $600, this land is mine, and after that, I will come for the Apache, with or without the law." He turned and mounted his horse, his men following suit. But before he rode away, he looked back at me one more time. "Enjoy the quiet while it lasts, Cord," he said, "because it is about to end." They rode off, disappearing into the heat shimmer that rose from the desert floor. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Tommy spoke, his voice small and frightened. "Uncle Jacob, what do we do?" I did not have an answer. Not yet. Dawson stayed behind after the others left. He dismounted and walked over to where I stood, his expression troubled. "Jacob," he said, "what the hell are you doing?" "The right thing," I said. "The right thing will get you killed." "Maybe." Dawson shook his head, frustrated. "You do not understand," he said. "Coleman is not just some angry landowner. He is connected. He has money. He has judges in his pocket, and he is not going to let this go." "I know. Then why are you doing this?" I looked at Naya, who was watching us from the porch. Then I looked at Tommy. "Because if I do not," I said quietly, "I lose more than land. I lose the only thing I have left." "What is that?" "A chance to teach my nephew what it means to be a man." Dawson was silent for a moment. Then he sighed and reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a folded paper and handed it to me. "I should not be giving you this," he said. "But we have history, you and I. So I am going to pretend I did not see Coleman's paperwork too closely." I unfolded the paper. It was a copy of Coleman's claim, filed with the court. And at the bottom, in small print, was something that made my blood run cold. "This says Coleman has a deed from 1875, I said. "A deed that predates my family's purchase." Dawson nodded grimly. "If he can prove that deed is legitimate," he said, "your land was never yours to begin with. Your grandfather bought it from someone who did not have the right to sell it." "That is impossible," I said. "My grandfather bought this land legally. He had all the paperwork." "Then you better find that paperwork," Dawson said, "because if you do not, you lose everything. And I mean everything." He mounted his horse and looked down at me. "You are running out of time, Jacob," he said. "Use what is left wisely." He rode away, leaving me standing in the yard with a piece of paper that could destroy everything my family had built. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Naya and I sat on the porch. The stars were out again, cold and bright, scattered across the black dome of the sky like shards of broken glass. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "Done what?" "Stood up for me. You will lose your land, your home, everything." "I know." "Then why?" I thought about that for a long moment. The truth was complicated, tangled up with guilt and regret and a desperate need to prove that I was not the man I had been 12 years ago. "Because once," I said finally, "I stood quiet when I should have acted. A woman died because of my silence, and I have carried that with me every day since." Naya turned to look at me, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And you think saving me will make up for that?" "No," I said. "Nothing can make up for that. But maybe it can keep me from making the same mistake twice." She was quiet for a moment. "That woman," she said. "The one who died. What was her name?" "Mira," I said. "Did you love her?" I looked down at my hands, these hands that had held a rifle and done nothing while a woman bled out in the sand. "I do not know," I said, "but I should have saved her. And I did not. That is all that matters." Naya nodded slowly, as if she understood something about me that I had not yet put into words. "You are trying to save yourself," she said. "Yes." "That is honest," she said. "Most men lie about such things." We sat in silence after that, listening to the night sounds. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Closer, the cattle moved restlessly in their sleep. Then Naya spoke again, her voice soft. "If you help me," she said, "my people will help you." I looked at her, surprised. "Your people?" She nodded. "My father is Manaba. He is the leader of our band. When he finds out I am here, he will come. And if I tell him you protected me, he will protect you." "Why would he do that?" "Because honor is not something only white men understand," she said quietly. "My people know the value of a man who stands when others run." Before I could respond, I heard the sound of horses in the distance. Multiple horses, moving slowly through the darkness. Tommy burst out of the cabin, his eyes wide. "Uncle Jacob, someone is coming." I stood, my hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. But Naya put her hand on my arm, stopping me. "It is all right," she said. That is my father." 3 figures emerged from the darkness, moving with the confidence of men who knew this land better than I ever would. They were Apache warriors, dressed in a mixture of traditional clothing and items traded from white settlers. They carried rifles, but they did not point them at us. They simply rode up to the fence and stopped. The man in the center was older, maybe 58, with long gray hair and a face carved from years of sun and wind. He looked at me with eyes that missed nothing, measuring me the way a craftsman measures wood before he cuts it. "Jacob Cord," he said in clear, unaccented English. "I know your name." I did not know what to say to that. "I saw you," he continued, 12 years ago, at Fort Apache." My stomach dropped. "You were there?" I said. He nodded slowly. "I was in the rocks above the canyon," he said. "I saw what your soldiers did, and I saw you, standing at the edge, doing nothing." I felt the shame wash over me again, hot and suffocating. "I am sorry," I said. The words felt useless, inadequate, but they were all I had. Manaba studied me for a long moment. "You were sorry then too," he said. "I could see it in your face. But you did not act." "No," I said, "I did not. But today," he said, "you did act. You protected my daughter." "A white man protecting an Apache? That is rare." He dismounted and walked to the fence, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "That is why I am here," he said, "to repay a debt." "You do not owe me anything," I said. "Yes," he said, "I do, because you gave my daughter back her hope, and hope is a precious thing to my people." He looked at Tommy, who was standing behind me, half hidden in the shadows. "You have a son," he said. "Nephew," I corrected. "His father was my brother." Manaba nodded. "You are teaching him," he said. "Good. Boys need to be taught, not just how to fight, but when to fight, and why." He turned his attention back to me. "Coleman will come for you," he said, "and when he does, you will need more than courage. You will need allies." "Why would you help me?" I asked. "Because we are the same, you and I," he said. "We both have sons who need to see us do the right thing." He gestured to the younger warrior beside him, a boy of maybe 17. "This is Naelnish," he said, "my nephew. He is learning just as your boy is learning. Let us teach them together." And with that, the alliance was formed. Not with grand speeches or written contracts, just with an understanding between 2 men who had seen too much, lost too much, and were trying to do better. As Manaba and his men melted back into the darkness, I felt something shift inside me. For 12 years, I had lived alone, keeping the world at arm's length, afraid of what would happen if I let anyone get too close. But now, standing in the yard with Naya beside me and Tommy at my back, I realized that isolation had never protected me. It had only made me weaker. The fight was coming. I knew that now. But for the first time in a long time, I was not facing it alone. And that, I thought, made all the difference. The days that followed moved with the strange, suspended quality of a storm building on the horizon. You could feel it coming, see the dark clouds gathering in the distance, but you could not say exactly when the lightning would strike. We had 7 days. 7 days to find proof that my family's claim to this land was legitimate. 7 days to prepare for whatever Coleman would bring when those days ran out. 1 week to teach Tommy what it meant to stand your ground. Manaba returned the next morning with Naelnish and another warrior, a man of about 30 named Takota. They came quietly, the way Apache always moved, as if the land itself conspired to hide their footsteps. Tommy was in the yard when they arrived, and I saw him tense, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle I had told him to keep close. "It is all right," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "They are friends." Tommy looked at me with wide eyes, as if the word friend and Apache had never belonged in the same sentence before. But he lowered the rifle and waited. Manaba dismounted and walked straight to where I was standing. He did not waste time with pleasantries. That was not his way. "The deadline is coming," he said. "What is your plan?" "I do not have one yet," I admitted. "Then we will make one," he said simply. He gestured for the others to join us, and we gathered around the porch, a strange assembly of men from two different worlds trying to solve a problem that belonged to both of us. Naya sat on the step, her injured arm still bound but healing. She listened without speaking, her dark eyes moving from face to face, measuring each of us in turn. Manaba spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "Coleman wants two things," he said, "your land and my daughter. He will use the law to take the first and force to take the second. We must stop both." "How?" Tommy asked, his young voice cutting through the tension. Manaba looked at him with something like approval. "By being smarter than he is," Manaba said, "and by working together. Your uncle cannot win this fight alone, neither can we. But together, we have a chance." He turned his attention to me. "You said you paid Coleman the money," he said. "Where is the proof?" "I burned it," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. 3 years ago, I thought I was being organized, cleaning up old records. Manaba nodded, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only calculation. "Then we find another way to prove the land is yours," he said. "Old deeds, surveys, witnesses who remember the original sale." "That was 40 years ago," I said. "My grandfather bought this land in the early 1840s. Most of the people who were here then are dead." "Most," Manaba said, "but not all." He was right. There had to be someone, somewhere, who remembered, someone who had kept records. The land office in Copper Ridge, maybe, or one of the old surveyors who had mapped this territory back when Arizona was still a wild, ungoverned place. "Dawson will know," I said suddenly. "He works with the courts. He will know where the old records are kept." "Then you go to him," Manaba said. "Today. Now." "What about the ranch?" I asked. "If I leave, Coleman might come back." Manaba smiled faintly. "That is why we are here," he said. "Go. We will watch." I looked at Tommy, who was listening to all of this with the intense concentration of a boy trying to understand a world that was suddenly much larger and more complicated than he had imagined. "Tommy," I said, "you stay here with Manaba and the others. Do what they tell you. Learn from them." Tommy nodded, his face pale but determined. "Yes, Uncle Jacob." I saddled my horse and rode toward town, the morning sun already hot on my back. It was a 2-hour ride to Copper Ridge, and I used the time to think, to plan, to prepare myself for whatever I might find when I got there. Copper Ridge was not much of a town, a main street lined with wooden buildings, most of them leaning slightly to one side as if the desert wind had spent years trying to knock them over. There was a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a squat brick building that served as both the courthouse and the marshal's office. I found Dawson inside, sitting at a desk covered in paperwork, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw the worry in his eyes. "Jacob," he said, "I was hoping you would come." "I need your help," I said. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I figured as much," he said. "What do you need?" "Records," I said. "Old land records. From the 1840s. I need to prove my grandfather bought this land legally." Dawson was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Those records are kept at the Territorial Land Office," he said. "But there was a fire in 1878. Most of the old files were destroyed." I felt my heart sink. "Most?" I asked. "Not all," Dawson said. "The clerk at the time, a woman named Mary Sullivan, she kept personal copies of some of the more important transactions. She retired a few years back, but she might still have them." "Where can I find her?" "She lives on the east side of town," Dawson said. "Little house with a blue door. You cannot miss it." I started to leave, but Dawson called after me. "Jacob," he said, "be careful. Coleman has eyes everywhere. If he finds out you are digging into this, he will come for you before the 7 days are up." "I know," I said, "but I do not have a choice." "We always have a choice," Dawson said quietly. "That is the problem." Mary Sullivan was 70 years old, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that were still sharp and clear despite her age. She answered the door on the second knock, holding a cane in one hand and a suspicious expression on her face. "What do you want?" she asked. "Mrs. Sullivan," I said, removing my hat. "My name is Jacob Cord. I need your help." Her expression softened slightly when she heard my name. "Cord," she said. "I knew your grandfather. William Cord. Good man, honest." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "He bought land in the San Pedro Valley in 1843. I am trying to prove that purchase was legitimate." She studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The inside of her house was small but immaculate, every surface dusted and polished, every book on the shelf arranged with military precision. She led me to a table in the corner where several wooden boxes sat stacked on top of each other. After the fire, she said, "I saved what I could. The government did not care. They just wanted to rebuild and move on. But I knew that one day someone would need these records." She opened one of the boxes and began sorting through yellowed papers, her fingers moving with surprising speed and dexterity. "Here," she said finally, pulling out a folded document. "This is the original deed for the Cord property, dated April 1843, signed by the territorial governor and witnessed by 3 men, all of whom were respectable citizens at the time." She handed it to me, and I unfolded it with trembling hands. There it was. My grandfather's name, written in careful script. The description of the land, 320 acres in the San Pedro Valley, bounded by the creek to the west and the old wagon road to the east. "This proves it," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "This proves the land is mine." Mrs. Sullivan nodded. "It does," she said. "But there is something else you should know." She pulled out another document, this one newer, dated 1875. "Coleman filed a claim that year," she said. "He said he bought land in the San Pedro Valley from a man named Harrison, but the land he described in his claim is 2 miles north of your property, not the same parcel at all." "Then why is he claiming my land?" I asked. "Because Harrison sold him worthless ground," she said. "Rocky soil, no water. Coleman realized he had been cheated, so he started looking for ways to take better land." "Your land." She looked at me, her old eyes full of a fierce, quiet anger. "Men like Coleman," she said, "they think they can rewrite history if they have enough money. But history does not change just because someone wants it to. The truth is the truth, written in ink and signed by witnesses." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because my husband died at Antietam," she said quietly. "He was in your regiment. You wrote me a letter after he died. You told me he was brave, that he did not suffer. It was a lie, was it not?" I felt my throat tighten. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "It was a lie. He suffered. But I did not want you to carry that." She nodded slowly. "I knew it was a lie," she said. "But it was a kind lie. And kindness matters, Mr. Cord. That is why I am helping you now." She wrapped the documents carefully in cloth and handed them to me. "Take these to the hearing," she said. "Show them to the judge, and do not let Coleman intimidate you." "I will not," I said. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. You have given me more than I could have hoped for." She smiled faintly. "Then do not waste it," she said. I rode back toward the ranch, the documents tucked safely in my saddlebag, my mind already racing ahead to the hearing, to the moment when I would stand before the judge and present this proof. I felt a surge of hope, stronger than anything I had felt in years. But the hope did not last long. I was halfway home, riding through a narrow canyon called Good Hope Pass, when I heard the sound of horses behind me. I turned in the saddle and saw them. 5 men, riding hard, their faces set with purpose. Coleman's men. I kicked my horse into a gallop, but the canyon was narrow and the ground was loose with scree. My horse stumbled, and in that moment of hesitation, they caught up with me. The first shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. I ducked low, spurring my horse forward, but another shot came, and this time I felt the impact. Not in me, but in my horse. The animal screamed and went down, throwing me hard onto the rocky ground. I hit with a force that knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I could do nothing but lie there, gasping, trying to remember how to breathe. Then I heard footsteps, and I looked up to see one of Coleman's men standing over me, his gun pointed at my chest. "Coleman says hello," the man said, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, another shot rang out, and the man fell, blood blooming across his shirt. I looked up and saw Dawson, riding hard into the canyon, his rifle still raised. "Get up, Jacob," he shouted. "Now!" I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my saddlebag, and ran to where Dawson was pulling his horse around. He reached down and hauled me up behind him, and we rode out of that canyon as fast as the horse could carry us, bullets whining past our heads like angry hornets. We did not stop until we were clear, and by then Dawson was bleeding. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing through flesh and muscle, leaving a ragged wound that bled freely. "You are hit," I said. "I will live," Dawson said through gritted teeth, "but we need to get you back to your ranch. Coleman knows you have the documents now. He will come for you." "How did you know I was in trouble?" I asked. "Because I know Coleman," Dawson said, "and I knew he would not let you get those records back to town without a fight." We rode the rest of the way in silence, Dawson swaying in the saddle, his face pale with blood loss. When we reached the ranch, Manaba and the others were waiting. They took one look at Dawson and moved into action, efficient and calm, as if they had done this 100 times before. Naya and Manaba worked together, cleaning the wound, stitching it closed with careful precision. And all the while Tommy watched, his young face serious, absorbing the lesson without needing to be told what it meant. When they finished, Dawson looked at me, his face drawn with pain. "You have the documents?" he asked. I nodded. "Good," he said. "Then we have a chance. But Coleman is not going to wait for the hearing now. He is going to come for you. Tonight, maybe. Tomorrow at the latest." "Then we prepare," Manaba said simply. And that is what we did. We spent the rest of the day turning the ranch into a fortress. Manaba taught us how to set traps, simple but effective. Caltrops made from old horseshoes, scattered around the perimeter to cripple horses. Shallow pits covered with brush, deep enough to trip a man in the dark. Tripwires attached to bells, to give us warning when someone approached. Nalnish showed Tommy how to use a bow, how to draw and release without making a sound. Tommy practiced until his fingers were raw, but he did not complain. He worked with a focus I had never seen in him before, as if he understood that this was no longer a game. Naya, despite her injured arm, moved among us, offering advice, correcting our mistakes, teaching us the ways her people had survived for generations in a land that did not forgive weakness. And through it all, I kept thinking about the documents in my saddlebag. Proof that this land was mine. Proof that Coleman was a liar and a thief. But I also knew that proof only mattered if we lived long enough to show it. That night, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, we gathered on the porch. Manaba, Dawson, Naya, Nalnish, Dakota, Tommy, and me. 7 people, bound together by circumstance and choice, preparing to face whatever darkness was coming. Manaba spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "Coleman will not come alone," he said. "He will bring men, many men. We cannot beat them with force, but we can beat them with strategy." He outlined the plan, simple and brutal in its efficiency. We would not meet them head on. We would let them come to us, let them believe we were weak and unprepared. And then, when they were close, when they thought they had won, we would strike. It was a good plan, a smart plan. But it relied on one thing. It relied on all of us trusting each other. I looked around at the faces gathered on that porch, an Apache chief and his warriors, a U.S. Marshal who was risking his career to help me, a 12-year-old boy who was learning to be a man in the hardest way possible, and a woman who had every reason to hate me and my kind, but who had chosen to stand with us anyway. We were not family, not by blood, but in that moment, we were something more important. We were people who had chosen each other. And that, I thought, was worth fighting for. The night deepened, and the stars came out, cold and distant and uncaring. Somewhere out there, Coleman was gathering his men, sharpening his knives, making his plans. But here, on this ranch that my grandfather had built and my family had held for 40 years, we were ready to fight, ready to stand, ready to prove that some things, some pieces of ground, some bonds between people were worth defending, no matter the cost. Tommy came to sit beside me, and I put my arm around his shoulders. "Are we going to be all right, Uncle Jacob?" he asked. I did not lie to him. I did not tell him that everything would be fine, that we would win, that no one would get hurt. Instead, I told him the truth. "I do not know," I said, "but we are going to face it together, and that is all any man can do." He leaned against me, and we sat there in the darkness, waiting for the storm to break. They came at midnight, when the moon was a thin sliver hanging low in the sky, barely bright enough to cast shadows. I heard them before I saw them, the soft crunch of hooves on dry earth, the jingle of spurs and bridles, the whispered curses of men who thought they were being quiet but were not. 12 riders, maybe more. It was hard to tell in the darkness. I was on the roof of the cabin, lying flat against the rough wooden shingles, a rifle cradled in my arms. Beside me, Nilnish crouched like a cat, his bow already strung, an arrow nocked and ready. Below, hidden in the shadows of the porch, Dakota waited with his own rifle. Manaba was in the barn, positioned where he could see the entire yard. Dawson, despite his wounded shoulder, had insisted on taking a position near the well, where he had a clear line of sight to the main approach. Tommy and Naya were inside the cabin, which we had fortified as best we could. Furniture pushed against the windows, gun ports cut into the shutters, water buckets stationed in case of fire. It was not much, but it was something. The plan was simple. Let them come. Let them think we were unprepared, and then hit them hard from multiple directions, using the darkness and their own confusion against them. I could see them now, dark shapes moving slowly through the scrub, fanning out as they approached the ranch. They were being cautious, which was smart. Coleman had learned from our last encounter that I was not going to simply roll over, but caution would only take them so far. The first man to reach the yard never saw the caltrop. His horse stepped on it, and the sharpened horseshoe spike drove up through the hoof and into the tender flesh above. The animal screamed, a high, terrible sound that shattered the night silence, and reared up, throwing its rider hard onto the ground. The man landed badly, and I heard the crack of bone even from where I lay. He started screaming too, clutching his leg, and suddenly the whole night was full of noise and confusion. That was when Manaba fired. The shot came from the barn, precise and deadly. One of Coleman's men fell from his saddle without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. The others scattered, shouting, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. Nilnish released his arrow. I did not see it fly, but I heard the soft thunk as it buried itself in a man's shoulder, and then his cry of pain. Another arrow followed, and another. Nilnish moved like water, smooth and fast, his hands a blur as he drew and released, drew and released. I sighted down my rifle, looking for a target. There. A man dismounting, trying to use his horse for cover. I squeezed the trigger, felt the kick against my shoulder, and the man went down. I could not tell if I had killed him or just wounded him, and in that moment, I did not care. This was not about killing. This was about surviving. More shots rang out from below. Dakota and Dawson were firing now, their muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Coleman's men were returning fire, but they were shooting blind, wasting ammunition on shadows and fear. One of them got smart and threw a torch toward the barn, trying to set it alight. But Manaba had anticipated that. He had soaked the walls with water earlier in the evening, and the torch sputtered and died in the mud. Then I saw him. Coleman himself, staying back from the fight, directing his men from a safe distance. He was on horseback, a dark shape against the starlit sky, and even from here I could see the rage in his posture, the way he gestured angrily at his men, driving them forward. I shifted my aim, putting the rifle sights on his chest. One shot, that was all it would take. One shot, and this would be over. But I did not take it. I do not know why. Maybe because shooting a man from ambush, even a man like Coleman, felt too much like murder. Maybe because I wanted him to face justice in a courtroom, not die in the dirt. Or maybe because I was still, after all these years, the same man who had stood frozen while Mira died, unable to move, unable to act. Whatever the reason, I hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, everything changed. A rider broke through the line, charging straight for the cabin. He had a torch in one hand and was heading for the porch, clearly intending to set the whole place ablaze. Dakota fired at him, but missed in the darkness. The rider kept coming, and then Tommy appeared in the doorway, his rifle raised. "No!" I shouted, but it was too late. Tommy fired. The shot went wide, missing the rider but spooking his horse. The animal veered sharply, and the rider lost his balance. He fell, the torch flying from his hand and landing in the dry brush near the fence. Flames leaped up immediately, bright and hungry, feeding on the parched grass and dead wood. Within seconds the fire was spreading, racing along the fence line, turning the night orange and red. "Get water!" I shouted down to the cabin. "Now!" Naya burst out of the door, carrying 2 buckets, Tommy right behind her with 2 more. They ran toward the fire, but it was already too big, too hot. The fence was going to burn. There was no stopping it. Coleman's men saw their opportunity. With the fire providing light, they could see us now. They dismounted and advanced on foot, using the smoke for cover, firing as they came. A bullet struck the roof near my head, sending splinters flying. I rolled, fired back, rolled again. Beside me, Nalnish grunted in pain. I looked over and saw blood on his arm where a bullet had grazed him. But he kept shooting, his face set with determination. "This is not working," I shouted to him. "We need to fall back." He nodded, and we scrambled down from the roof, using the ladder we had positioned earlier for exactly this purpose. As my feet hit the ground, I saw Manaba emerge from the barn, moving fast despite his age, Dakota covering him with rifle fire. Inside, I shouted to everyone, "Get inside now!" We fell back to the cabin, all of us, crowding through the door as bullets chewed into the wood around us. Once we were in, Dawson and I barricaded the door with the heavy oak table, while Manaba and Dakota took positions at the windows. Tommy was in the corner, his face pale, his hands shaking as he reloaded his rifle. Naya moved to his side, putting a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Her injured arm was bleeding again where she had torn the stitches, but she did not seem to notice. "You did well," she said to Tommy. "You kept fighting." "I almost got us killed," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "No," Naya said firmly. "You tried to protect us. That is what matters." Outside, I could hear Coleman's men regrouping. They would rush the cabin soon, I knew. They had us trapped. All they had to do was wait us out, or burn us out, and it would be over. I looked around at the faces in that cabin. Manaba, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Dawson, his shoulder wound reopened and soaking through his shirt. Nalnish, his arm wrapped in cloth that was already turning red. Dakota, his face grim and set. Naya and Tommy, both frightened but still standing, still ready to fight. We had held them off for now, but we could not hold them forever. And then I heard a voice outside. Coleman's voice, loud and full of rage. "Cord," he shouted. "I know you are in there. Come out now, and I will let the others live. My fight is with you." I moved to the window, peering out through the gun port. Coleman was standing in the firelight, his face twisted with fury. Behind him, I could see at least 8 men still on their feet. We had hurt them, but not enough. "What do I do?" I asked Manaba quietly. The old man looked at me with those calm, measuring eyes. "You do what you came here to do," he said. "You stand. But if I go out there, they might let you go." "They will kill us all," Manaba said flatly. Coleman does not leave witnesses. You know that." He was right. I did know that. But knowing it and accepting it were two different things. "Cord!" Coleman shouted again. "You have 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8. "Wait," another voice called out. Everyone froze. That voice. I knew that voice. Silas Brennan. He came walking out of the darkness, his hands raised, no weapon visible. Coleman spun to face him, his expression furious. "What are you doing here, Brennan?" "Stopping you," Silas said. And then, before anyone could react, Silas drew a pistol from behind his back and fired. The bullet took Coleman in the shoulder, spinning him around. Coleman went down, clutching the wound, his face contorted with shock and pain. Silas stood there, the gun still smoking in his hand, facing Coleman's men. "This ends now," Silas said, his voice shaking but clear. "I am done. Do you hear me? I am done working for this man, done watching him destroy people, done being part of his poison." One of Coleman's men raised his rifle, pointing it at Silas. "You are dead, Brennan," the man said. "Maybe," Silas said, "but not by him." Before the man could fire, Dawson burst out of the cabin, his own rifle raised. "Federal Marshal," Dawson shouted, "lower your weapons, now!" The men hesitated, caught between loyalty to Coleman and fear of the law. That moment of hesitation was all we needed. Manaba and I came out of the cabin, weapons ready. Dakota and Naalnish followed. One by one, Coleman's men lowered their guns and stepped back, their hands raised. It was over. Coleman was lying in the dirt, bleeding from the shoulder wound, his face pale. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had not expected. Not rage, not hatred, just fear. "You cannot prove anything," he gasped. "The land is still mine. The court will rule in my favor." I walked over to him and crouched down, pulling the wrapped documents from inside my coat. "These are the original deeds," I said. "From 1843, signed and witnessed. They prove my grandfather bought this land legally 40 years ago. Your claim is a lie, Coleman, and now everyone knows it." His face went white. "No," he whispered. "Yes," I said, "and when we go to court in 4 days the judge will see these. And you will lose. Everything." I stood up and looked at Silas, who was still standing there, the gun hanging loosely in his hand. "Why?" I asked him. "Why did you do it?" Silas looked at Coleman, then back at me. "Because he told me tonight that after this was over, he was going to kill my family," Silas said quietly. "My wife, my daughter. He said they were loose ends, witnesses who could testify against him." His voice broke. "I have done terrible things," Silas said. "I know that. I am going to hell for the things I have done. But I will not let him hurt my family. I will not." Dawson walked over and put a hand on Silas's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "That counts for something." Silas nodded, tears streaming down his face, and let Dawson take the gun from his hand. I turned back to the cabin where Tommy and Naya were standing in the doorway. Tommy ran to me, throwing his arms around my waist, his whole body shaking. "Is it over?" he asked. "Is it really over?" I looked down at him, at this boy who had seen too much violence in one night, who had been forced to grow up too fast. And I wished I could tell him yes, wished I could say that it was over, that everything would be all right now. But I could not. Because even as we stood there, even as Coleman's men were being disarmed and tied up, I saw Coleman struggling to his feet. His face was twisted with rage and pain, and he had a small pistol in his hand, the kind of hideaway gun that desperate men carried. He raised it, pointing it not at me, but at Tommy. "If I cannot have that land," Coleman said, his voice thick with blood and hatred, "then no one will." Time slowed. I saw the gun. I saw Coleman's finger tightening on the trigger. I saw Tommy, frozen, unable to move. And I moved. I threw myself forward, putting my body between Coleman and my nephew. The gun fired, a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud. I felt the impact, a punch to my left side that drove the air from my lungs and sent me stumbling. Coleman never got a chance for a second shot. Dakota's rifle barked once, and Coleman fell backward into the dirt, the gun tumbling from his lifeless fingers. I went down to my knees, my hand pressed to my side, feeling the hot wetness of blood seeping through my shirt. The pain came a moment later, sharp and terrible, radiating out from the wound like fire. "Uncle Jacob!" Tommy screamed, dropping to the ground beside me. "No, no, no, no." Naya was there too, pushing Tommy gently aside, her hands already moving to examine the wound. Her face was grim, but composed. "How bad?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Bad," she said honestly. "The bullet is still inside. You need a doctor. Now." "The nearest doctor is in Copper Ridge," Dawson said, already moving toward the horses. 2 hours away." "He will not last 2 hours," Naya said flatly. The world was starting to gray at the edges, my vision tunneling. I could hear voices, urgent and worried, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. Then Manaba was kneeling beside me, his weathered face close to mine. "Jacob Cord," he said, "can you hear me?" I nodded, or tried to. "You are not going to die," Manaba said with absolute certainty. "Not after everything we have been through, not after standing when you should have run." He turned to Naya and Nyalnish, speaking rapidly in Apache. They nodded and moved quickly, gathering supplies. "We will remove the bullet here," Manaba said to me. "It will hurt, but you will live." "Do it," I managed to say. And they did. I do not remember much of what came next. Only pain, bright and all-consuming. Only Tommy's hand gripping mine, refusing to let go even when I squeezed hard enough to hurt him. Only Naya's voice, steady and calm, guiding me through it. "Breathe," she said. "Just breathe. You have survived worse than this." Had I? I could not remember, could not think, could only hold on to consciousness by the thinnest of threads. And then, finally, it was over. The bullet was out. The wound was packed and bandaged, and I was lying on my back in the cabin, staring up at the ceiling, feeling weak as a newborn calf, but alive. Alive. Tommy was beside me, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "You saved me," he said. "You took that bullet for me." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. Naya held a cup of water to my lips and I drank, the cool liquid like salvation. "Of course I did," I finally managed to say. "You are my family, Tommy. I would die for you." "But you did not die," Tommy said fiercely. "You did not die because we would not let you." I looked around the cabin at the faces gathered there. Manaba and his warriors, Dawson, Silas, Naya, people who had fought beside me, bled beside me, people who had every reason to walk away, but had chosen to stay. "Thank you," I said to all of them, "for everything." Manaba nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "You stood when it mattered," he said. "That is all any man can do." Outside, the fire had burned itself out, leaving the fence blackened but still standing. Coleman's body lay where it had fallen, covered with a blanket. His men had been taken away by Dawson's deputies, arrested for attempted murder, arson, and a dozen other crimes. And in 4 days, we would go to court. We would present the documents that proved this land was mine, and we would win. But for now, in this moment, with the dawn just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, I let myself rest. Let myself feel the weight of what we had survived. Let myself be grateful for the people around me, and for the fact that I was still here to see another sunrise. Tommy curled up beside me on the floor, refusing to leave my side. And as I drifted toward sleep, I felt something I had not felt in 12 long years. Peace. Tommy curled up beside me on the floor, refusing to leave my side. And as I drifted toward sleep, I felt something I had not felt in 12 long years. Peace. But peace, I would learn, was not the same as rest. The wound in my side burned like a brand, and the fever came in waves, pulling me under, dragging me into dreams where the past and present tangled together like barbed wire. Sometimes I was at Fort Apache. Sometimes I was here, bleeding in the dirt. And sometimes I was nowhere at all. suspended in a darkness that had no shape or sound. I do not know how long I stayed in that place between waking and sleeping. Hours maybe, or days. Time lost all meaning when pain was the only constant. When I finally surfaced again, 3 days had passed. I spent 3 days in that cabin, drifting in and out of fever dreams where the past and present tangled together like thorns. Sometimes I was 30 years old again, standing in that canyon at Fort Apache, watching Mira fall. Sometimes I was lying in the dirt outside my own ranch, feeling Coleman's bullet tear through me. And sometimes I was somewhere else entirely, a place without time or pain, where the voices of the dead spoke softly in languages I could not understand, but somehow knew. Naya sat with me through most of it, changing my bandages, spooning water and broth into my mouth when I could swallow, wiping the sweat from my forehead when the fever burned hottest. She did not speak much. She did not need to. Her presence alone was enough, a quiet anchor keeping me tethered to the living world. Tommy never left the cabin. He slept on the floor beside my bed, his small hand wrapped around mine even in sleep. Once, when I woke in the deepest part of the night, I saw him sitting up, watching me with eyes that looked far too old for his 12 years. "I thought you were going to die," he whispered. "I am harder to kill than that," I said, my voice rough as gravel. "That is not funny, Uncle Jacob." "I know. I am sorry." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that broke my heart. "Everyone I love dies," he said. "My mother, my father. I thought you were going to die too." I pulled him close with my good arm, ignoring the pain that flared in my side. "I am not going anywhere," I said. "I promise." "You cannot promise that." "No. But I can promise to fight like hell to stay." On the morning of the 4th day, I woke with a clear head for the first time. The fever had broken in the night, leaving me weak and hollow but alive. Manaba was sitting in the chair by the window, his weathered face thoughtful as he watched the sunrise. "You are awake," he said without turning around. "I am." "Good. We have work to do." He told me that the court hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Dawson had managed to delay it by 2 days, citing the violence at the ranch and the need to gather evidence, but Judge Anderson had refused to postpone it any further. If I wanted to save my land, I had to appear before the court today, in person, with the documents. "I cannot ride," I said, the truth of it bitter on my tongue. "I can barely stand." "Then we will take you in the wagon," Manaba said. "It will not be comfortable, but it will get you there." "What about Coleman?" I asked. "Is he really dead?" "Very dead," Manaba said with a certain grim satisfaction. "Dakota shoots well." I felt a complicated twist of emotion at that. Relief, guilt, gratitude. Coleman had been a monster, but he had also been a man, and I could not help but wonder what had made him that way. What choices, what losses, what cruelties had turned him into the kind of person who would try to murder a child. But those thoughts were luxuries I could not afford. Not today. Manaba helped me sit up, and the room spun sickeningly for a moment before steadying. Naya appeared with clean clothes and helped me dress, her hands gentle but efficient. Every movement sent fresh pain lancing through my side, but I gritted my teeth and bore it. Tommy came in as I was pulling on my boots, his face anxious. "You should not be doing this," he said. "You should be resting." "I will rest after," I said. "Right now, I need to finish what we started." The wagon ride to Copper Ridge was every bit as miserable as Manaba had predicted. Every bump in the road felt like a knife twisting in my gut, and by the time we reached the town, I was sweating and pale, barely able to keep myself upright. But I was there, and that was what mattered. The courthouse was a squat brick building on the main street, already crowded with people when we arrived. Word had spread about what had happened at the ranch, about the gunfight and Coleman's death, and it seemed like half the territory had turned out to see how it would end. Dawson met us at the door, his face grave. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can walk," I said, though in truth I was not sure. He and Manaba helped me down from the wagon, and together we made our way inside, Tommy and Naya following close behind. Dakota and Nyalnish stayed outside with the horses, their eyes scanning the crowd, still watchful for trouble. The courtroom was packed, every bench filled, people standing along the walls. I recognized some faces from town. Others were strangers. And at the front, sitting at the plaintiff's table, was Coleman's lawyer, a thin man with spectacles and a calculating expression. Judge Anderson sat behind the bench, an old man with white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was known for being fair but inflexible, a man who followed the letter of the law with religious devotion. "Mr. Cord," he said as I made my way slowly to the defendant's table, "I heard you were injured. Are you well enough to proceed?" "I am, Your Honor," I said, lowering myself carefully into the chair. "Very well. Let us begin." Coleman's lawyer stood, smoothing his jacket. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, the late Mr. Ezekiel Coleman, filed a legitimate claim to the property known as the Cord Ranch. He had documentation showing that he purchased land in the San Pedro Valley in 1875, and that this land included the acreage currently occupied by Mr. Cord. Furthermore, Mr. Coleman had witnesses prepared to testify that Mr. Cord owed him a substantial sum of money, $600, which was never repaid. Under territorial law, this debt, combined with the prior land claim, gives Mr. Coleman's estate the right to seize the property." He sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Anderson turned to me. "Mr. Cord, your response." I stood, wincing at the pain, and pulled the wrapped documents from my coat. My hands were shaking as I laid them on the table, but my voice was steady. "Your Honor," I said, "I have here the original deed to my family's property, dated April 1843. It shows that my grandfather, William Cord, purchased 320 acres in the San Pedro Valley from the territorial government. The purchase was legal, properly witnessed, and recorded with the land office. I unfolded the first document and passed it to the clerk, who brought it to the judge. Judge Anderson examined it carefully, his expression unreadable. "This appears genuine," he said. "Where did you obtain it?" "From Mrs. Mary Sullivan, Your Honor. She was the clerk at the Territorial Land Office for 30 years. She kept personal copies of important documents, including this one." The judge nodded slowly. "And what of Mr. Coleman's claim from 1875? "I have that as well, Your Honor." I passed the second document forward. Judge Anderson read it, his eyebrows rising slightly. "According to this," he said, "Mr. Coleman purchased 160 acres in 1875, but the land described here is 2 miles north of the Cord property. It is not the same parcel." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Coleman's lawyer half rose from his seat, his face reddening. "Your Honor, that document is obviously a forgery. My client's records clearly show." "Do they?" the judge interrupted. "Because I have reviewed your client's records, and they are remarkably vague about the exact location of the land, almost as if they were intentionally written to be ambiguous." He set the documents down and looked directly at Coleman's lawyer. "It seems to me," he said, "that your client attempted to defraud Mr. Cord by claiming land that was never his, and when that failed, he attempted to collect a fictional debt. Is that not so?" The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I thought as much," Judge Anderson said. He turned to me. "Mr. Cord, I find in your favor. The land is yours, legally purchased and properly documented. Mr. Coleman's claim is dismissed." The courtroom erupted in noise, people talking and shouting, some cheering, some arguing. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "However," he continued, "there is still the matter of the violence that occurred. Mr. Coleman is dead, shot during what I understand was an attack on your property. Several of his men are in custody, and you yourself are clearly injured. Marshal Dawson, what are your findings?" Dawson, his posture stiff but his voice clear. "Your Honor, I investigated the incident thoroughly. Mr. Coleman and approximately 12 armed men attacked Mr. Cord's ranch in the middle of the night. They opened fire without provocation, attempted to burn the buildings, and shot Mr. Cord when he tried to protect his nephew. Mr. Coleman was killed in self-defense when he attempted to shoot a 12-year-old child. The men who accompanied him have been charged with attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy." He paused, then added, "I should also note that Mr. Silas Brennan, who had been working for Mr. Coleman, turned against him during the attack and likely saved several lives, including my own. While Mr. Brennan has admitted to previous crimes, including kidnapping, I recommend leniency in his case." Judge Anderson considered this. "Mr. Brennan," he called, "stand up." Silas rose from where he had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, his face pale and drawn. "You have done terrible things," the judge said. "Things that normally would earn you a long prison sentence, if not a hanging. But you also chose, in a critical moment, to do the right thing. That counts for something." He drummed his fingers on the bench, thinking. "I sentence you to 5 years in the territorial prison," he said finally. "However, if you cooperate fully with Marshal Dawson's investigation and testify against Coleman's remaining associates, I will reduce that sentence to 2 years, after which you will be free to rejoin your family and start over. Do you understand?" Silas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you." "Court is adjourned," Judge Anderson said, and brought the gavel down one final time. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I sat back down, the last of my strength finally giving out. Naya was beside me immediately, her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "The land is yours." "Ours," I said, "if you will stay." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching mine. "I will stay," she said, "for now. But not because you own me, not because I owe you, because I choose to." "I understand," I said, "and I would not have it any other way." Tommy threw his arms around me, careful of my wound, his face pressed against my chest. "We won, Uncle Jacob. We really won." "Yes," I said, stroking his hair, "we did." But even as I said it, I knew the real victory was not the land. The land was just dirt and grass, rock and sky. It could be taken or given, bought or sold, fought over or abandoned. The real victory was this: these people around me. Tommy, who had learned what it meant to stand for something. Naya, who had chosen to trust again after everything she had lost. Manaba and his warriors, who had fought beside a white man because honor mattered more than old hatreds. Dawson, who had risked his career to do what was right. Even Silas, who had found, in his darkest moment, a spark of something better than he had been. We had all won, and we had won together. That night, back at the ranch, we gathered around a fire in the yard. The burned sections of fence stood like dark teeth against the sky, reminders of what we had survived. But they could be rebuilt. Everything could be rebuilt. Manaba sat beside me, smoking a pipe, the smoke rising thin and blue in the still air. "What will you do now?" I asked him. "Return to my people," he said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that not all white men are enemies, that some, a few, can be trusted." He glanced at me. "You have changed something, Jacob Cord. Not just for yourself, for all of us. The story of what happened here will be told for a long time. It will matter." "I hope so," I said. He stood, preparing to leave, and Tommy came over to say goodbye. Manaba placed a hand on the boy's head, a gesture of blessing. "You have become a man these past days," he said to Tommy. "Continue to grow strong. Continue to choose honor over fear." "I will," Tommy said solemnly. Nayalnish and Dakota mounted their horses, and together the 3 Apache warriors rode into the darkness, disappearing like smoke. Naya stood beside me, watching them go. "My father likes you," she said. "That is rare." "I like him too," I said. She smiled, just a little. "We should go inside," she said. "You need to rest." "In a minute," I said. I sat there by the fire, feeling the warmth on my face, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Tommy leaned against me, half asleep, and I wrapped my arm around him, holding him close. "Uncle Jacob," he said drowsily, Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think you are a good man now, after everything that happened? I thought about that. About Mira and Fort Apache. About the 47 seconds I had stood frozen while a woman died. About Coleman and the bullet I had taken for Tommy. About all the choices, good and bad, that had brought me to this moment. I do not know, I said honestly, but I think I am better than I was. And maybe that is enough. Tommy nodded against my chest. I think you are a good man, he said. I think you are the best man I know. And then he fell asleep, his breathing slow and even, trusting and safe in my arms. I sat there holding him, watching the fire burn down to embers, feeling the pain in my side and not caring. Because for the first time in 12 years, I felt something other than guilt and regret. I felt proud of what I had done, proud of what we had accomplished together, proud of the man Tommy was becoming, and the small part I had played in that. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and bright and eternal. Somewhere out there, Mira was at peace, I hoped. Somewhere out there, the world continued turning, indifferent to the small dramas of small men on small pieces of land. But here, in this moment, on this ranch that had been fought for and bled for and nearly died for, I had found something I thought I had lost forever. I had found redemption, not complete, not perfect, but real. And that, I thought as I finally stood and carried Tommy inside to bed, was all any man could ask for. A chance to be better, a chance to stand when it mattered, a chance to love and be loved, to protect and be protected, to fight for something worth fighting for. I had been given that chance, and I had taken it, and that made all the difference. 3 weeks passed before I could work without pain shooting through my side. 3 weeks of healing, of mending both body and the things that violence had broken. The fence was rebuilt, stronger than before. The burned sections of wood were replaced with fresh timber that Manaba and his warriors helped us cut from the hills to the north. The bullet hole in my side closed slowly, leaving a scar that would ache when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of the night Coleman tried to take everything. But some wounds healed faster than others. Tommy changed in those weeks, not all at once, but in small ways that accumulated like water filling a basin. He worked harder, complained less, carried himself with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. He no longer flinched when strangers rode past on the road. He no longer asked if we were safe, if Coleman's men would come back, if the land was truly ours. He knew the answers now. He had learned them in fire and blood, and the choice to stand when running would have been easier. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the porch, cleaning the rifle I had given him, his young hands moving with the careful precision I had taught him. He looked up when I approached, and I saw something in his eyes that had not been there before the night of the attack. Purpose. "Uncle Jacob," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "That night," he said, "when you stepped in front of Coleman's gun, when you took that bullet for me, were you scared?" I sat down beside him, feeling the familiar pull in my side as I lowered myself onto the wooden step. "Terrified," I said honestly. "But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Why?" I looked at him, at this boy who had lost so much, who had been given into my care by an accident of death and circumstance, who had become the most important thing in my life without either of us quite realizing when it happened. "Because some things are worth dying for," I said, "and you are one of them." Tommy was quiet for a long time after that. Then he set the rifle aside and leaned against me, the way he had when he was younger, before his father died, before the world taught him that nothing good lasted. "I love you, Uncle Jacob," he said quietly. "I love you too, Tommy." We sat there in the afternoon sun, and I felt something settle inside me, something that had been restless and broken for 12 long years. Not forgiveness, exactly. I did not know if I would ever truly forgive myself for what I had failed to do at Fort Apache. But perhaps something close to it. Perhaps the beginning of peace. Naya stayed. I had not asked her to. I had not assumed she would. But each day she remained, working alongside us, helping to rebuild what had been damaged, teaching Tommy skills that I could never teach him. How to track game through scrubland. How to find water where there seemed to be none. How to read the sky for weather and the ground for danger. She did not speak much about her decision to remain. But I understood, I thought. She had spent so long running, so long surviving, that the simple act of staying in one place, of choosing a home rather than having one forced upon her, was itself a kind of freedom. One evening, as we were finishing the day's work, she came to find me at the corral, where I was checking on one of the horses that had thrown a shoe. "We need to talk," she said. I turned to face her, trying to read her expression in the fading light. "All right," I said. She was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes serious. "I want to stay," she said. "Not as a guest, not as someone you saved, but as a partner, someone who works this land with you, someone who has a say in how things are done." I nodded slowly. "I would like that," I said. "But there are conditions," she continued. "Tell me." "I will not marry you," she said bluntly. "Not in the way white people understand marriage. I will not be your property. I will not promise to obey you or serve you or put your needs before my own." "I understand. If my people need me, I will go to them. You will not stop me. I would never stop you. And if you try to change who I am, if you expect me to become something I am not, I will leave, and I will not come back." I looked at her. This woman who had survived things I could barely imagine, who had fought and killed and lost and kept going anyway, who had somehow chosen to trust me with her presence, if not yet her heart. "Naya," I said quietly, "I do not want you to change. I want you to be exactly who you are. Strong, free, unbending. Those are the things I admire most about you." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for the lie, for the hidden expectations that men so often carried but never spoke aloud. "Then we have an agreement," she said finally. "We do," I said. And then to seal it, we shook hands. Not a kiss, not an embrace, but a handshake between equals, between partners who respected each other enough to be honest about what they could and could not give. It was, I thought, the most honest beginning I had ever been part of. Manaba came to visit 2 weeks later, riding down from the hills with Nyalnish and another young warrior I had not met before. They brought news of their band, of the hunting grounds they were working to protect, of the slow, careful negotiations they were conducting with the territorial government to try to secure some small piece of land they could call their own. "It was not much," Manaba said, as we sat around the fire that night. "A few hundred acres in the high country, rocky ground that no white farmer wants. But it is ours, and that matters." "It matters a great deal," I said. He looked at me across the flames, his weathered face thoughtful. "You have done well, Jacob Cord," he said. "The land is yours. Your nephew is strong. My daughter is happy. These are good things." "I have been lucky," I said. "No," Manaba said firmly. "Not lucky. You made choices, hard choices, and you stood by them when it would have been easier to run. That is not luck. That is character." He paused, then continued. "My people have a saying. A man is not measured by what he takes, but by what he gives, and by what he leaves behind when he is gone." "What will I leave behind?" I asked. Manaba gestured around the ranch, at Tommy practicing with his rifle in the distance, at Naya hanging clothes to dry, at the rebuilt fence and the cattle grazing peacefully in the evening light. "This," he said simply. "All of this, the land, the boy, the example, the story, these things will outlast you. They will matter long after you are dust." "I hope so," I said. "Do not hope," Manaba said. "No." That night, after Manaba and his warriors had left, I called Tommy to the porch. He came quickly, wiping dirt from his hands, his face curious. "Sit down," I said. He did, looking at me with those serious eyes. "I have something for you," I said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "What is it?" "A deed," I said, "transferring ownership of this ranch to you." Tommy's eyes went wide. "But I am only 12, he said. "I know," I said, "but in 6 years you will be 18. And when that day comes, this land will be legally yours. Until then, I will hold it in trust. But make no mistake, Tommy, this is your ranch now, your inheritance, your responsibility." "But what if something happens to you?" he asked, his voice small. "Then it is still yours," I said. "That is the point. No one can take it from you. Not Coleman's family, if any of them try to make a claim. Not the government. Not anyone. It is yours by law and by right." I unfolded the paper and showed him where I had signed my name, where the judge had witnessed it, where the official seal of the territorial court made it legal and binding. "Why are you doing this?" Tommy asked. "Because I want you to understand something," I said. "This land is not just dirt and grass. It is a legacy. It is proof that the Cord family stands for something, that we do not run, that we do not give up, that we protect what is ours, and we stand by those we love." I put the deed in his hands. "One day," I continued, "you will be older than I am now. You will have children of your own, maybe, or maybe someone else who needs you, the way you needed me. And when that day comes, I want you to remember what we did here, what we fought for. And I want you to teach them the same lessons." Tommy looked down at the deed, his fingers tracing the writing, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "I will," he whispered. "I promise." "Good," I said. "That is all I ask." We sat together in the growing darkness, and I felt the weight of years settling over me. Not the burden of age, not yet, but the awareness of time's passage, of the fact that nothing lasts forever except the stories we tell and the lessons we pass on. I was 42 years old. If I was lucky, I had perhaps 40 more years ahead of me. Maybe less. Maybe, if fortune smiled, a few more. But however many years remained, I wanted to use them well. I wanted to be the man that Tommy thought I was, the man that Naya had chosen to stand beside, the man that Manaba saw when he spoke of character and choice. I wanted to be better than the man who had stood frozen for 47 seconds while Mira died. And I thought, sitting there with my nephew beside me and the woman I was learning to love moving inside the cabin, that perhaps I was getting there. Perhaps I had already arrived. The years that followed were quieter. We worked the land, raised cattle, learned to live with the scars violence had left. Tommy grew tall and strong. His childhood fell away like shed skin. Naya became more than a partner. She was a teacher. She taught me to see the land not as something to conquer, but to respect. She taught me that strength was not always loud, that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to stay. And slowly, over months that became years, she taught me how to love again. Not the desperate love of youth, but something deeper, a love built on daily choice, on respect, on trust. Manaba visited often, bringing news of his people, helping with the work when we needed extra hands, sitting by the fire and telling stories that Tommy listened to with rapt attention. Stories of the old days, before the white settlers came. Stories of battles and betrayals and the long, slow loss of everything his people had once been. But also stories of survival, of adaptation, of the stubborn refusal to disappear. "You are part of our history now," he told me once. "You and your family. The story of the rancher who stood with the Apache will be told for generations. It will matter." "I hope it matters in the right way," I said. "It will," Manaba said, "because it is true. And truth always matters, even when it is uncomfortable." Marshall Dawson became a regular visitor as well, stopping by every few months to check on us, to share news from town, to sit on the porch and smoke and talk about the war we had fought together a lifetime ago. His shoulder healed, but it left him with a limp that grew more pronounced as the years passed. "I am getting old," he said once, almost surprised by the realization. "We all are," I said. "But we are still here," he said. "That counts for something." "Yes," I said. "It does." Silas Brennan served his 2 years in prison and was released in 1885. I never saw him again, but I heard he made it to California with his family, that he found work as a carpenter, that he lived quietly and stayed out of trouble. I hoped it was true. I hoped he found the peace he was looking for. The world changed around us, slowly but inexorably. The frontier closed. Towns grew larger. The railroad came, bringing with it new people, new ideas, new ways of living. The Apache Wars finally ended, and Manaba's people were moved to a reservation, a small piece of land that was theirs by treaty, but felt like a cage. It broke something in Manaba to accept that reservation. I could see it in his eyes when he came to say goodbye, when he told me that his people had to go, that there was no choice left. "But we will survive," he said. "We always have." "I know you will," I said. "And you will visit," he said. It was not a question. "I will visit," I promised. And I did. Every few months Tommy and I would make the long ride to the reservation, bringing supplies, bringing news, bringing ourselves. And every time, Manaba would greet us like family, because that is what we had become, not by blood, but by choice. The years turned. Tommy became a man, tall and strong and good, everything I had hoped he would be. He took over more and more of the ranch work, letting me slow down, letting me rest when the old wound in my side ached, or the memories of that terrible night came back too strong. Naya's hair started showing threads of gray. So did mine. We aged together, slowly, our bodies wearing down the way all bodies do, but our spirits somehow growing stronger, more certain, more content. And through it all, through the seasons and the years and the slow march of time, the ranch remained. The land that my grandfather had bought and my family had held and I had fought for remained ours. Passed down now to Tommy, but still here, still standing, still meaning something. On my 82nd birthday, in the summer of 1923, Tommy threw a small celebration. He was 52 years old by then, graying at the temples, with children of his own grown and starting families of their own. Naya was 67, moving a little slower but still strong, still sharp, still refusing to be anything other than exactly who she was. We sat on the porch, the three of us, watching the sun set over the land we had fought so hard to keep. "Tell me the story again," Tommy said. "The one about Coleman and the night everything changed." "You have heard that story 100 times," I said. "Tell me anyway," he said. "I want my grandchildren to hear it. I want them to know where they come from." So I told it again. The whole thing, from the moment Silas Brennan dropped Naya in my yard to the courthouse in Copper Ridge to the night Coleman died. I told it the way it happened, holding nothing back, including the parts that made me look weak or foolish or afraid. Because that was important too. The fear, the doubt, that terrible moment at Fort Apache that had defined so much of what came after. "We are not heroes," I said at the end. "We were just people who made a choice, and we were lucky enough to survive it." "No," Tommy said. "You are wrong about that." "About what?" "About the hero part. You were a hero. Maybe not the kind that gets written about in books or celebrated in town squares, but the kind that matters most. The kind who stands up when it would be easier to sit down. The kind who does the right thing even when it costs everything." He looked at his own children and grandchildren, gathered around us in the twilight. "That is what I want you to remember," he said to them. "That is the legacy of this family. Not the land, not the money, but the choice to stand." The youngest of Tommy's grandchildren, a girl of maybe 6, looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Did it hurt?" she asked. "When you got shot?" "Yes," I said. "It hurt a great deal." "Were you scared?" "Terrified." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." She thought about that for a moment. "I want to be brave like you," she said. I smiled and reached out to touch her cheek. Then be brave, I said. But remember, being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you do the right thing even when you are afraid. That is the difference. She nodded solemnly, and I saw in her eyes a spark of something I recognized. The same determination I had seen in Tommy all those years ago. The same refusal to give up that had kept me going through the darkest times. The legacy would continue. Not in my name necessarily, but in the lessons, in the choices, in the understanding that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was hard and the outcome uncertain. As the stars came out and the night settled over the ranch, Naya took my hand, her fingers warm and familiar. "No regrets?" she asked quietly. "None," I said. And it was true. For all the pain, all the loss, all the years of carrying guilt and shame, I would not change what had happened. Because changing any of it would mean losing this moment, this family, this life we had built together from blood and fire and choice. I closed my eyes and let the night sounds wash over me. The cattle lowing softly, the wind moving through the grass, the voices of children laughing, playing, living the kind of life that Tommy and Naya and I had fought to make possible. And I thought of Mira, lying dead in the sand at Fort Apache, her blood soaking into the earth while I stood frozen and useless. "I am sorry," I said silently, knowing she could not hear me, knowing it did not matter. "I am sorry I failed you. But I hope, wherever you are, you can see what came after. I hope you can see that I learned, that I changed, that I became better than I was. And I hope that counts for something." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, lonely and wild. I opened my eyes and looked at the people around me. My family. Not all by blood, but all by choice. All here because of decisions made, stands taken, courage summoned from places I did not know existed until the moment required it. This is what I leave behind, I thought. Not just land, not just cattle and fences and buildings, but this. The knowledge that one man, flawed and frightened and full of regret, chose to stand when it mattered, chose to fight when running would have been easier, chose to love when losing hurt too much to bear. And that choice made all the difference. The night deepened. One by one the children were taken inside to sleep. Tommy and his family departed, promising to return in the morning. And finally, it was just Naya and me, sitting on the porch we had sat on countless times before, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For staying, for standing beside me, for teaching me what it means to be free." She smiled, and even in the darkness, I could see the warmth in it. "Thank you for being worth staying for," she said. We sat in silence after that, comfortable and complete, two people who had walked through fire together and come out the other side, scarred but standing, broken but whole. And as the night settled around us like a blanket, I felt something I had not felt since that terrible day at Fort Apache, something I thought I had lost forever in 47 seconds of cowardice and shame. I felt worthy, worthy of this life, worthy of this love, worthy of the legacy I was leaving behind. Not because I was perfect, not because I had never failed, but because I had tried, because I had learned, because when the moment came, when the choice had to be made, I had found the courage to stand. And in the end, that was all anyone could do. Stand when it mattered, fight for what was right, and pass the lesson on to those who came after. My name is Jacob Cord. I am 82 years old, and this is my story. The story of how I learned that silence kills, but action, even when it comes too late, can still redeem. The story of a ranch in the San Pedro Valley and the people who fought for it, and the legacy they left behind. It is not a perfect story, but it is true. And truth, as Manaba always said, is the only thing that lasts.